Americans urge to kill invasive Frankenfish as land-walking predator expands into New York. A highly invasive fish species known as Northern Snakehead, often nicknamed the Frankenfish, is continuing its rapid spread across the United States, prompting wildlife officials to issue an urgent warning to anglers and residents. Now let's explore this complete story from every perspective on our AI podcast.
Imagine you were enjoying just like a perfectly quiet day by your local pond.
Oh, sounds nice.
Right. The water is still, the sun is out, and maybe you've got a fishing line in the water. You're just taking it all in. But then you hear this rustling at the edge of the water.
Like in the mud.
Yeah, right in the mud. And you look over, expecting to see a frog or maybe a turtle. But instead, a 3-foot snake-like fish crawls out of the water, starts breathing the air, and just begins moving across the dry land.
I mean, it is an image that completely breaks your brain. It goes against everything we inherently understand about how aquatic life is supposed to function.
It sounds like a folklore legend or some crazy myth. But this is a very real, incredibly adaptable apex predator that is currently causing a nationwide panic among ecologists and wildlife officials alike.
It really is.
So today's deep dive is all about the terrifying invasion of the northern snakehead, which is notoriously dubbed the Frankenfish.
Yeah.
We're pulling from an extensive stack of sources today. We've got wildlife warnings, ecological research papers, and some really recent State Department alerts.
Some pretty urgent ones, too.
Yeah, very urgent. Our mission today is to understand exactly why this creature demands our critical attention, the fascinating, honestly bizarre biological mechanics behind its survival, and what you listening to this right now, are being asked to do about it. So, okay, let's unpack this.
And right off the bat, I think we should validate anyone listening who feels a bit of disbelief.
Oh, for sure.
Because a land-walking, air-breathing fish sounds impossible. But this is a verified ecological crisis. We are dealing with an animal that basically breaks the conventional rules of biology. And because of that, it requires a completely unconventional response from us.
Right. And before we can even begin to understand the massive ecological threat this thing poses, we have to understand what we are physically looking at, because it is wildly unique.
It's very distinct.
So the northern snakehead is native to Asia, and it was first detected in U.S. waters back in 2002. Physically, if you saw one, you would not easily forget it. It has a long cylindrical body.
Yeah.
It has an elongated head that looks strikingly like a snake's, which is obviously where the name comes from. And it has an extended dorsal fin that runs almost down its entire back.
And it features this dark brown mottled pattern. The camouflage patterning is incredibly distinct. If you glance at it quickly, it looks almost exactly like a boa constrictor just resting in the shallows.
Which is terrifying on its own.
Right. And adult snakeheads, they can grow up to a massive 3 feet in length.
So it's huge, it's heavily camouflaged, and it looks intimidating. It really does look like a Frankenstein-style genetic experiment gone wrong, which cements exactly why the Frankenfish nickname is so incredibly accurate.
It really is the perfect name.
But the real kicker, like its absolute superpower, is that it can breathe air. As long as its skin stays moist, this fish can survive on land for several days.
Mm-hmm.
But I need to stop right here and ask the obvious question.
Go for it.
How does a fish breathe air? Because everything I learned in middle school biology says that fish gills extract dissolved oxygen from water.
Right.
So when you take a normal fish out of water, its gills just collapse, don't they?
Exactly. Think of normal fish gills like wet hair. When you are underwater, your hair floats and separates, right? It creates a lot of surface area.
Yeah, makes sense.
But when you pull your head out of the water, all that hair just clumps tightly together. That is what happens to normal fish gills in the air. They clump together, the surface area drops to practically zero, and they suffocate, even though they are literally surrounded by oxygen.
So how on earth does the snakehead bypass that?
What's fascinating here is that the northern snakehead has evolved a specialized respiratory structure. It's called a suprabranchial organ, or it's often referred to as a labyrinth organ.
A labyrinth organ?
Yeah, it is a highly folded, bony structure located just above the gills. And unlike those delicate gill filaments, this organ doesn't collapse in the air. It acts almost like a rudimentary lung. So the fish gulps air from the surface, traps it in this bony chamber, and highly concentrated blood vessels absorb the oxygen directly.
That is wild. So it has a built-in biological backup system for respiration. But What about the walking? How does a 3-foot cylindrical fish move across dry land without legs? I mean, it's not just flopping around randomly, is it?
Not at all. It is a highly coordinated movement. They use their pectoral fins, so the fins on their sides, almost like crutches, to stabilize their front half.
Okay.
And then they use their muscular cylindrical bodies to violently wriggle and propel themselves forward. It honestly looks like an aggressive army crawl.
Which provides a massive tactical advantage, right? Because for a normal bass or a trout, a landmass separating two ponds is an insurmountable barrier.
Absolutely.
It's just the end of their world. They can't cross it. But for the northern snakehead, that landmass is just a brief commute. It gives it this terrifying advantage in spreading across new territories without even needing a contiguous waterway.
Precisely. That off-roading capability is the primary driver behind the steady, relentless expansion we've seen. And it's moved through the eastern and mid-Atlantic United States over the last 2 decades. And according to our sources, that expansion has just crossed a major new threshold.
Yeah, the latest panic centers around Lily Pond in Suffolk County, Long Island. A fisherman just caught a northern snakehead there, and it marks the very first confirmed sighting in New York State.
Which is a huge deal.
It is. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, is now aggressively trying to prevent this from turning into a full-blown breeding population.
And their concern is entirely justified. They know the window to stop an invasive species is incredibly narrow.
Yeah.
Heidi O'Riordan, the regional fisheries manager for the New York State DEC, provided a quote that I think captures the urgency perfectly. She said they don't belong here. They have no natural predators and can severely disrupt native fish populations. They will eat almost anything that fits into their large mouths.
Yeah, our sources show their diet includes native fish, frogs, crayfish, and even small aquatic mammals. But, let me push back on this for a second.
Sure.
I want to play devil's advocate for anyone listening who might be thinking, well, ecosystems are constantly in flux. Local bays eat frogs and crayfish all the time. Is one ugly fish really going to completely topple an entire local food web? Nature adapts, doesn't it?
Well, nature does adapt, but adaptation takes thousands, sometimes millions of years. This isn't a natural integration. It is a hostile takeover.
Right.
To understand why wildlife officials are so deeply alarmed, we have to talk about a biological concept called naive prey.
Naive prey. Okay, explain that mechanism.
So native fish and frogs in New York evolved alongside native predators, like the largemouth bass. Over countless generations, they learned to recognize the shadow of a bass, the chemical scent a bass leaves in the water, and the specific way a bass hunts.
So they know what to look out for.
Exactly. They have evolved defensive instincts against that specific threat. But the snakehead is an alien to this ecosystem. The native prey simply do not recognize its hunting patterns, its silhouette, or its scent.
Oh, man.
Yeah. When a snakehead approaches, the native frogs and fish often don't even try to flee until it is far too late.
Oh, wow. It is essentially operating with an invisibility cloak.
Exactly. And because it has no natural predators of its own in these waters, nothing is keeping its numbers in check. It immediately installs itself at the very apex of the food chain.
Right.
When you combine an invisible predator with an insatiable appetite, it actively and rapidly reduces the overall biodiversity of the waterway.
And it isn't just their aggressive appetite that threatens the ecosystem, it's the sheer staggering math of their reproduction. We're talking about a biological numbers game that completely changes the calculus for wildlife agencies.
The reproductive capacity of the northern snakehead is perhaps its most dangerous attribute. It is the core reason why officials are terrified of them establishing a foothold anywhere.
Listen to these numbers from our sources because they are crazy. A single female snakehead can lay up to 15,000 eggs at once.
Which is a lot.
But she doesn't just do this once a year during a specific spawning season. She can spawn as many as 5 times per year.
Yeah.
And the eggs don't take months to incubate. They hatch in just a few days. I mean, it's basically a biological 3D printer stuck on the print setting.
It really is. If you run that math, a single female could potentially introduce 75,000 new snakeheads into an environment in a single year.
That's horrifying.
And unlike many fish that lay thousands of eggs and just abandon them, snakehead parents fiercely guard their nests and their fry, meaning the survival rate of those 75,000 babies is artificially high.
That is just mind-boggling. It completely highlights how quickly things can get out of hand. But wait, if I think about this logically, this reproductive explosion actually explains the walking behavior we talked about earlier, doesn't it? Well, if a pond is suddenly filled with tens of thousands of starving baby snakeheads, they're going to consume absolutely every available resource.
Yeah. Yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture, yes, that is exactly what happens. They eat themselves out of house and home.
Right.
The sheer density of the population rapidly depletes the food supply. This intense resource competition serves as a biological trigger. It forces the adults to utilize their labyrinth organ and their walking ability to migrate across land to find new, unexploited hunting grounds.
Which brings us to a really fascinating study out of the Chesapeake Bay region. Because scientists knew that these fish could walk, but they needed to figure out exactly what specific environmental stressors would force a fish one perfectly adapted to dominate the water to suddenly abandon ship.
They needed to understand the triggers to predict the spread, so researchers subjected snakeheads to an absolute gauntlet of environmental degradation.
They simulated almost every nightmare scenario a waterway could experience. They exposed the fish to warmer temperatures, increased salinity, higher acidity, severe overcrowding, darkness, heavy pollution, and even severely low oxygen water.
And the results were astonishing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The fish were exceptionally resilient. I mean, scientists threw basically every apocalyptic scenario at these creatures, and the snakeheads just shrugged it off.
Yeah, they really did.
They didn't even leave the water when the oxygen levels dropped to near zero.
Because they didn't have to. Thanks to that labyrinth organ we discussed, when the dissolved oxygen in the water plummeted, they simply swam to the surface and comfortably gulped atmospheric air. The poor water quality hardly bothered them at all.
But the scientists did eventually find their breaking point. Out of all those stressors, the snakeheads only actively left the water when faced with 3 highly specific conditions.
Which were?
Highly acidic water, elevated salinity, and excessive carbon dioxide. So, biologically speaking, why those 3? Why survive heavy pollution but flee from salt?
It comes down to tissue damage. Acid and high salt concentrations physically burn and degrade the delicate tissues of their gills and strip away their protective slime coat. Think of it like a submarine under attack.
Okay, I like this analogy. Walk me through it.
So, if a submarine is dealing with murky water, extreme heat, or general pollution outside, it just seals the hatches, relies on its internal life support, and waits it out.
Makes sense?
That is the snakehead using its labyrinth organ in polluted water. But if a highly corrosive acid is actively eating through the physical hull of the submarine, waiting it out is no longer an option. You have to abandon ship immediately.
I see.
Acid and salt are physical threats to the snakehead's structural integrity, triggering an immediate evacuation response.
And when they evacuated, the duration was incredible.
Mhm.
The study observed that some fish remained on land for just a few seconds, essentially testing the surrounding environment, while others stayed entirely out of the water for a full 20 minutes before returning.
This raises an important question, though. How do wildlife agencies actually use this highly specific behavioral data?
Right. It's great for a lab, but what about the real world?
Well, it moves our ecological response from reactive to proactive. If an agency knows the precise environmental triggers, so the acid, the salt, and the carbon dioxide, they can accurately predict snakehead movements.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. For instance, if a major storm surge pushes saltwater into a tidal freshwater creek, agencies can anticipate that snakeheads in that specific area will be forced onto land. They can then deploy highly targeted control strategies to intercept the fish before they reach the next pristine body of water.
But until science can build a perfect predictive model for every creek, river, and pond in America, wildlife officials are relying on a much more blunt instrument to stop the spread. And that blunt instrument is us.
Yes, the human element is currently the primary line of defense.
And we really are talking about a massive nationwide defense line. The sources show that these fish have already been reported in a vast list of states. I mean, we're talking Arkansas, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Louisiana, Maine,
Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, and New Jersey.
Yeah, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. The map of this invasion is huge. So authorities have issued a very clear and honestly pretty brutal directive to the public.
The guidance leaves absolutely no room for misinterpretation.
The directive is this: if you catch one, do not release it back into the water. And equally important, do not just leave it on the shore.
Right, because it won't die.
Exactly. Because, as we've established, if you just toss it on the bank, it will simply breathe the air, wait for you to drive away, and wriggle its way to the next pond. The Missouri Department of Conservation specifically advises killing the fish immediately. Their instructions are to sever its head, gut it, or seal it in a thick plastic bag to ensure it suffocates.
Those are extreme measures, especially for someone just enjoying a recreational activity. costs.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? If you're just, a casual weekend angler out with your kids trying to catch a few sunfish, suddenly you are expected to perform a decapitation on the riverbank. It feels so intense. It feels grim.
It is grim. It is undeniably jarring for a casual angler, but we have to look at the grim ecological calculus that makes wildlife agencies issue such draconian directives. We aren't asking people to be cruel, we are asking them to perform a critical emergency intervention.
Yeah.
When you are dealing with a creature capable of breathing air, surviving for days on land, dominating native species through the naive prey effect, and reproducing up to 75,000 times a year, half measures guarantee failure.
They can't just throw it in a bucket.
No. If you toss that single fish back into the water out of squeamishness, you are effectively signing a death warrant for every native base frog and salamander in that ecosystem.
Wow.
The ecosystem survival relies entirely on our willingness to be decisive. It is an uncomfortable task, but it is necessary to protect the native biodiversity that we value.
It really puts the immense weight of ecosystem management squarely on the shoulders of the public. So just to wrap our heads around everything we've covered in this deep dive, we are dealing with the Northern Snakehead, a fish native to Asia that has successfully invaded the eastern half of the United States.
Yep.
It's a massive predator that utilizes a labyrinth organ to breathe air, uses its fins to army crawl across dry land, reproduces by the tens of thousands to outcompete local wildlife, utterly decimates native food webs, and requires drastic, immediate physical intervention to stop.
That is the astonishing and frankly intimidating profile of the Frankenfish.
And the most important takeaway for you listening is this. If you live anywhere near a waterway in the eastern half of the country, or really anywhere at this point given their spread, you are now the frontline defense for your local ecosystem. Keep your eyes peeled.
Definitely.
If you see a fish that looks like a boa constrictor taking a stroll on the muddy shore, you now know exactly what you are looking at, you know the science behind how it's doing it, and you know exactly what the wildlife officials are asking you to do.
It is a remarkable story of biological adaptability. But it also leaves us with a lingering, quite unsettling thought if we look closely at the science we discussed today.
Uh-oh. What's that?
Well, we noted during the Chesapeake Bay study that the snakehead easily survived a barrage of extreme stressors: severely low oxygen water, warmer temperatures, and heady pollution.
Right.
It didn't just survive. It proved exceptionally resilient to the exact conditions that are currently degrading our natural environments globally. Given that our worldwide waterways are currently experiencing rising temperatures, increased agricultural runoff, and dropping oxygen levels, we have to ask ourselves a difficult question.
Okay.
Are we inadvertently looking at a superspecies? One that is already perfectly pre-adapted to inherit the Earth's changing, degraded waters long after our delicate native fish and our best eradication efforts have entirely failed.
Wow. Well, on that sobering, slightly terrifying note, next time you're sitting quietly by your local pond, keep a very close eye on the mud. You never know what might come crawling out.
Okay, one question for you. How concerned should Americans be about the rapid spread of the Northern Snakehead, considering its ability to survive on land, reproduce quickly, and outcompete native species for food and habitat? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.